I'm joined by Akash Chougule of the Americans for Prosperity. Good morning, Akash. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you again.
Akash, would you walk us through what Joe Biden? I mean, he's given the student loan relief like 14 times. What's he done this time, and when will the Supreme Court stop him this time?
I don't know the answer to your latter question. They've been pretty quick in the past. If folks will remember, last summer or last spring, I guess, he did this for the first time, attempted a sweeping student loan relief, which was at the behest of Elizabeth Warren and the other radicals in Congress who obviously cannot get this through Congress. And so the Supreme Court stepped in, stopped him. This is now, I believe, the fourth time he has tried to do this. We're north of $1 trillion in total attempts at loan relief. This one is no different. They're using different justifications, different parts of the regulatory code, different versions of executive authority, but they all have the same principles at hand, which is that the president has no authority to do this. They are unconstitutional. They are going to cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. They're going to worsen inflation. And most importantly, in this particular instance, Hugh, they're going to make the college crisis worse, which is increasing the bad incentives that colleges currently have when it comes to tuition and the way that they function, as well as the decisions that students make. And so it's obviously a desperate vote buying scheme. It's Bidenomics for higher education, and it's obviously not going to work.
It is Bidenomics. Now, Americans for Prosperity are my sponsor, and you've heard me talk about Bidenomics.com, but we're really drilling down on the student loan gambit because Akash just mentioned something. We have a great sponsor on this show, Americans for Prosperity, and its Director of Policy is Akash Chougule. And Akash was talking with me last hour when the state of California turned out the lights briefly. Akash, can you open up a headquarters in Southern California to see if maybe Southern California Edison and Gavin Newsom can keep the lights on?
Hey, you know this. We tried, and Kamala Harris tried to shut us down as Attorney General. We had to take her all the way to the Supreme Court and defeated her a couple years ago. But we are now active in all 50 states, and so that'll be soon on the list of policy priorities out there.
It is something else to see a once great state fall apart so that the infrastructure doesn't work in the middle of the night. Akash, let's go back to what we were talking about last hour. The president is trying for the fourth time to forgive student loan debt. Did they do anything different that presents a new issue to the court, or do you expect it to be enjoined immediately?
I expect it to be enjoined immediately. Look, they're trying every which way through the regulatory code, through his executive authority. But the fact of the matter is, these hundreds of billions of dollars, the administration has no authority to do this without Congress. Congress made that abundantly clear. It's a constitutional problem, it's a policy problem, it's an economic problem. We were talking about how this is basically just Bidenomics through executive order for college campuses. It's an absolute nightmare for the cost of college. It's a nightmare for taxpayers. It's a nightmare for anyone who cares about the rule of law. And as you were talking about before I jumped on, Hugh, it's a nightmare for anyone who thinks that college is badly in need of reform. But you don't need to look far these days to see that things are not going so well on America's college campuses.
You know, Akash, I don't think it's too much to ask of the Biden administration that before they do anything outside of the law, they actually complete what they're supposed to do, which is the FAFSA system, financial aid system. It's broken. Kids in America don't know how much financial aid they get from the various schools into which they've been admitted because the Biden administration broke the FAFSA system. Any word on whether they're going to get that up and running soon?
Nothing. We're hearing talking points. I was just talking to some friends about that, many of whom are still paying off their student loans. They have siblings that are dealing with it now. You're exactly right, Hugh. And this is so emblematic and so indicative of this administration. Government has very, very few responsibilities that they're actually supposed to be doing. The Biden administration can't properly do the things that they're supposed to be doing, and yet is running around trying to do more of the things that nobody wants them to do. It's really emblematic of how broken our federal government is. And it gets to the crux of why we are limited government conservatives to begin with. A really emblematic example, and no signs of resolving it anywhere close.
No, I don't know if you're going to update Bidenomics after this week, but we're going to get a couple of key statistics this week about inflation. What is your expectation, Akash, for the inflation impact that is out there over the horizon?
Yeah, it was obviously elevated last month, last couple months. I mean, I guess my guess is it will probably come down a little bit. These spring months, I would imagine, tend to be a little bit better. And of course, we'll see costs tick up again in the summer. But the fact of the matter is, Hugh, that it is nowhere near where this administration expected it or frankly wants it politically to be as we head into a presidential election. Inflation is elevated, and whether or not this month's particular statistic is lower or not, the American people don't look at inflation as a month to month statistic from some agency in Washington. They look at how their pocketbooks are doing over time, and what they know is that prices are up almost 20% since President Biden took office. 1 month of a better CPI stat is not going to change that for them.
You know, I always thought it was unfair for George H.W. Bush to lose re-election in 1992 because of a recession that was over in 1991. But the fact is, Americans don't believe a recession is over until 2 years into a recession's recovery. And I think that's going to bog down the president. Certainly the numbers over the weekend, I don't know if you saw the numbers that Steve Kornacki ran over. He is so upside down compared to other presidents, Akash. I don't know how he wins this.
Well, we've talked about this. The way he wins it is for the election to become a referendum on Donald Trump, right? I mean, Donald Trump's not been on the campaign stage quite as much because he's been in courtrooms, but at the same time, people feel like they haven't heard him say anything that has bothered them in quite a while. And the focus has been on Joe Biden and Joe Biden's economy. I think you're exactly right, Hugh, which is that when people look at how they're doing economically, they don't look at line graphs and charts and all these other things from the White House and all these agencies. They look at whether they can afford to make ends meet and whether they have a chance to build their American dream, which is to buy a home or buy a new car. And not only are prices up, but interest rates are up, which are putting those things that kind of embody the American dream, putting those things further out of reach as well. Until that changes, I don't think people are going to feel comfortable with this economy. And they're right to blame Joe Biden, but not just Joe Biden. Also, the Democrats in Congress who voted for that additional $6 trillion in spending through the Inflation Reduction Act and you know these other pieces of legislation that Nancy Pelosi ushered through when she was controlling the House of Representatives.
Wall Street Journal this morning. These home sellers are done waiting for the Fed to lower rates. People need to upside, downsize, and change jobs, even if mortgage rates don't come down soon. They're not coming down soon. They're going to stay elevated for as long as this president is president until they get a new Federal Reserve, until they get some fiscal discipline. That's my projection. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. You're seeing the 10-year Treasury rates are at like 4.5%, 5%. Those are indicators of what inflation is going to look like, right? And as long as those are elevated, there's going to be an expectation that inflation is elevated. We spent way, way too much over the last few years, frankly, even during Trump's last year in the White House, for this to be fixed overnight like the Biden administration wanted it to be. And so until we really get the reins on government spending, we get entitlements under control, these deficits are going to continue to exceed $1 trillion or more. And that's asking for an inflation crisis. There's no end in sight. And frankly, I think not only should Republicans be running against Bidenomics, Hugh, they should be running on reining in the drivers of our deficits and debts, because right now is the moment that people are paying attention and care about that issue in a way that they have not in a very long time. We don't need Bidenomics, and we don't need Bidenomics Republican version either.
Akash, do you think people actually care about the debt? It's $34 trillion. And today I read Niall Ferguson from the Hoover Institution saying, whenever a country spends more on debt service than they do on defense, and we are getting close to that right now, that country is doomed. Do you think the American people make that connection?
I don't know that they make that specific connection. We just surpassed that, infamous sort of talking data point recently. I think what they're paying attention to, Hugh, is prices, right? These deficits are driving an inflation crisis, which has not always been the case. We obviously had very low inflation for a long time. I think now is the moment people care about deficits and debt, not because they feel the debt, but because they feel the consequences of all that spending in the inflation crisis. And so we were very supportive of, for example, Speaker Johnson's attempt to get a debt commission created in Congress and anything that will start the conversation on this, because we have a moment right now to address this when people are paying attention. And frankly, because we have to pay attention now. If we don't pay attention right now, people's Social Security checks will be cut 23% in the next few years if these deficits are not addressed and if these programs, these entitlements, frankly, are not reformed.
Go and get all the details at American for Prosperity's website, which is handily named Bidenomics.com, because the AFP folks were awake when the Bidenomics team were asleep at the switch because Team Biden did not want Akash and his friends to get a hold of Bidenomics. But they did, and they tell the real story there. By the way, how often do you update Bidenomics.com, Akash?
We're doing it periodically. I mean, every time he's going to say something new about one of these things on the campaign trail, we're going to be on it, fact checking him from here until the end of the year.
I hope you continue to do that because it isn't getting better for him. It's not getting better for any American. It's getting worse because inflation is cumulative. Last time I looked, 19.8% since he became president. I would love to know when that number goes above 20%. If you're watching it, I would love for people to know that they have got 20% less purchasing power now than they did 4 years ago. Akash, good to see you. I'm going to see you for lunch later today. I look forward to it. We will scheme together on how best to present the Americans for Prosperity picture to people across the United States.